Hi, I'm Avalok the Young, current king of Ardesca, and I'm here today to talk about and show you a bit about making the most excellent weapons that we may fight each other most excellently. What do we start talking about? What is an excellent weapon? For start, we'll talk about the theory of weapon construction. The first thing that you need to understand is that efficacy is first. If your weapon doesn't work as a weapon, it's kind of useless. Therefore, it doesn't matter how cool it looks, it needs to be functional, which is going to take a lot of work. The next aspect will be cool factor, how to make it look great, because that has its own bonus for fighting and bonus for you as well. But remember, efficacy first. When I say efficacy, what I mean is weapons are tools first, which means they need to move well, increase, not decrease your fighting ability, and be something that actively aids in your understanding of martial combat. That means they move smoothly, that means you move them well, that means that they feel good in your hand, that means that they weigh properly. All of these things you'll have to learn through experience because everybody has them differently. Next up on that is durability. I'm going to spend all this time making a weapon rather than just wrapping a stick in tape. I want it to last. So making good materials and other ways like that is going to be better than using poor materials. My suggestion immediately is use good equipment and materials to make good equipment. Garbage in, garbage out. First things is we have to choose proper materials to make our weapons from. In general, rattan is the go-to solid choice all of the time, and there are two kinds of rattan. There's yellow rattan, which keeps the skin on. There's white rattan, which has the skin shaved off. I do not believe in using white rattan almost ever. I know it's popular in a lot of places because it's designed to be leaner, or people say that it gets to be quicker. I don't think that matters. I think that the size of the rattan has more to do with it and how you treat it. And the yellow skin on the outside of the rattan is so effective at protecting it from impact, it can increase the life of your sword at least double just for using the yellow rattan, if not triple. So when you get the chance, if you have the option, get yellow rattan instead of white rattan. All right. When choosing yellow rattan, it is important to take a look at it and understand it. A lot of times, what you'll find are these black kind of indentations in it, marks of that sort. If there are a good number of those, or if any of them have holes, you want to avoid that rattan. Normally these are burrowing insect holes, and they will go through the rattan and make it weaker. It isn't end all. You can have some and they can be part of it, and that's all right. But in general, if you can get a cleaner stick of rattan that's yellow, you're going to be better off and happier. This is not to say that the rattan is the only thing we build weapons out of. We can build the EMP rules are made specifically broad so that we can try as many things as we want, as long as it is basically like rattan or it is effectively rattan, because we base our rules off of rattan, how hard we hit, what we do, everything like that. So when you're making a new weapon out of plastic, or you're making a new weapon, or you're treating rattan in any particular given fashion to make it better, consider that as you do it. All right, now we're here in Flanagan's workshop, and we're going to take up some actual of the tools of the trade and show you what I mean when I want you to work with good tools. The first primary tool for making weapons is almost always strapping tape. Strapping tape comes in a variety of sizes, and some of it is great and some of it is terrible. This particular style of strapping tape that you'll see rather opaque, you can count the number of lines going through it. Probably there's maybe 12, 15 in this, is the poorest quality of strapping tape you can possibly imagine. I'll show you why. There is a trick that you do with these things, and when you have it, you can actually take this and tear it apart with your hand. That makes it next to useless for protecting your rattan versus the metal edges, the helmets it's hitting, the shield, everything like that. Don't use it unless you absolutely have to. If it's all you can find, fine. You'll probably need to double layer it, which is going to increase your weight. Think about that while you're making the sword. This is Scotch 3M 898 style. There are 50 to 100 strands that go to this. There is no possibility I can tear it in half with my hands. It is designed for industrial market. You can get it on eBay a lot of times if you know where to look for it. And honestly, it is the top grade of strapping tape that you can possibly use. I suggest it highly. I use it almost exclusively in all of the weapons I make because I don't want them to degrade. This has to do with durability and the strength. We'll teach you how to apply it in just a little bit. On the outside of the strapping tape, because strapping tape is ugly, we do need to put a layer of something that's going to look a little better than it. A lot of people like duct tape. I kind of get away from duct tape because duct tape is heavy, in my opinion, kind of ugly. It makes a facsimile of steel, but it's not really good. Most swords at the time, if they were of lower end metal, well, many swords weren't, I get it, but one of the things that you would do to keep it off is blacken them. I use a lot of black athletic tape on my swords. It doesn't weigh a lot. It stands up moderately well, but most important, it's easy to pull off the sword and put on another layer if you want it to look good. I did that before I came down here, sadly. Otherwise, I'd show you what they look like beforehand and after. But if I'm going to Crown Tournament or whatever, one layer of this will work well, and it does a good job of making your sword look good for very little weight. Sometimes people use different colors. They want different ideas. Electrical tape also can be used. It's pretty stretchy. It goes around. I find that it subdues or it gets damaged easier than the strapping tape, and it has more of a little bit of a shine to it. You can get it in a bunch of colors easier. But I find it's good to define a blade edge. It's good to... You can even wrap an entire sword in it, and it'll work out. There are a lot of other things besides rattan that we can make weapons out of and have coverings for weapons. One of the most important that I have used is leather. And you'll notice on this particular spear, there's a lot of different leathers that go onto it. The head of this particular spear is rattan that goes all the way up. There's a thrusting tip on it. And then it has been covered by leather of about 3 to 4 ounce on the sides, and then heavier, at least 6 ounce, all along the striking surface. And if you look at it that way, you'll understand how it's better than tape, but it takes a lot longer, and there will be a whole opportunity for us to go through how to make one of these a little bit later. You'll also see a different kind of leather here that's a gold inlay filigree imitating a gold haft or a bronze haft. At least it used to be. This is about a year old. But you can use leather and get a very interesting and dynamic look to your weapons if you so chose. You'll notice that the leather is sewn off of the edge. Do not sew on the edge of your weapon because that will get hit a lot and it'll just tear through the sewing. You want to rotate the sewing down at least ½ inch all the way in. 3 kinds of glues that are used on that particular weapon that you just saw. The first kind of glue, and the most important in making these weapons, is shoe glue. Shoe glue can be found at most shoe repair shops. You can find it off of Amazon. You can find it off of eBay. Shoe glue is fantastic because it's a rubberized glue. And one of the problems with epoxy, a lot of people like to try epoxy on their rattan weapons, and the difficulty comes down to the impacts that we use shatter the epoxy on a regular basis, and the epoxy ends up as little crystals. Shoe glue, which has got rubberization in it, basically absorbs that impact and stays sticky and does its job throughout the life of the weapon. Shoe glue is one of my primary tools. You should pick it up. I use it to glue thrusting tips on. I use it to line different parts of changing weapons. I use it to create good adhesion points for cross guards, and everything. Shoe glue is great. Another type of glue that we use in making these is contact cement. I use Weldwood personally. You can get it at Home Depot, but the leather that you saw on the weapon that I had made just right there was one that had contact cement put on it before it was sewn. This is rubber cement, which is a different kind of thing, and it's kind of the mix in between contact cement and shoe glue. When you want to have something that has the aspects of both, use rubber cement. It is functional. I tend to go for extremes myself, so I don't use a lot of rubber cement, but it is worthwhile. I like the super stickiness of shoe glue over it, and I like the tacky build that I get on contact cement on the opposite side of it. But otherwise, it works out really well, and it is the good way to do it. Finally, epoxy. A lot of people like epoxy. One of the reasons why I don't use it, even to, like, some people soak their blade in it in order to get it to be harder, to lose some of the resiliency of the rattan, which is but doable. I don't think it matters that much. The problem with it is it shatters on the inside, and when it shatters, it becomes dust, and it creates all of the rest of the dust on the inside of the rattan, and it destroys your rattan reasonably quickly. I also have found that when it's used to put on cross guards, say like this, you've got a cross guard that slides up and you want it to adhere, my suggestion is use shoe glue. The reason is this is going to be taking a lot of impacts, it's going to get hit, it's going to have jockeying around, the rattan's going to vibrate. All of that will destroy the epoxy, whereas the shoe glue won't. With the epoxy, when you put it in here, I have seen time and again, they'll line the inside with epoxy, it puts up like this, they'll even put a ring through it, and the sword will break off right here, exactly where the epoxy is, because it creates an aspect of the rattan where it loses its flexibility, which is some of its durability, and then shatters at that point, or tears off at that point, thus making you make another sword even faster. Complete waste of time. If you want your swords to go a little bit longer and to last a little bit better, I'm going to teach you next about something called oiling, and you can place oil throughout the rattan, and it will help, especially in very dry climates like this one in Texas. It will cause the rattan to stay a little bit moister, a little bit more flexible, and less powdery, to be destroyed from, have a longer life and only be destroyed from impact, not from just the weather. So, that being said, let's take a look at oiling. The EMP has rules that are designed around what the thrusting tip can do, how far it enters a helmet, how far it can collapse. That is the only things you're going to have to work around. Now, almost always, in order to provide what we call progressive give, you need some kind of foam. Foam, as you'll notice in this, gets harder as you press it down. That's what we mean by progressive give. Now, the other primary rule of a thrusting tip is that your weapon cannot enter a helmet. And so, we want to have a point that looks like a point but cannot go more than 3/4 of an inch into a standard helmet. Standard helmet has a 1-inch gap between bars, so our rules say, which means if at the 3/4 inch mark, you're going to find a 1 1/4 inch across section. All of these things are designed to do it. This is designed for a large spear. Somebody wants to be very generous, they use a 3-inch across top like this, and it makes a very squishy thing. Spears being very dangerous, I fully understand why people would want to use this. Eventually, I'll show you how to make a coronel point out of this, which is like this, does the same job, but is better at hooking armor. These tips are carved so that they face and fit a 3/4 inch profile, and when you put it into a helmet, once you've got it taped, it won't penetrate more, but it still looks basically like a tip. We want that because we need our tips and our thrusting to look good while still being functional. I find that basically stacked foam like this is children's building block foam, is one of the most useful and forgiving substances. When I don't feel like being so forgiving, I use this. This is a hard boat foam. You can find these for making weapon heads. I got this one from Master Eric at Penzig. You may carve these into thrusting tips that fit exactly what you're looking for and basically create a very detectable form of thrust. One of the principal reasons that thrusts are so difficult is that they don't give the clack that happens when you hit with a sword. Many fighters need that reminder when you hit their helmet, because it's next to impossible to hit a man hard enough in the head with a stick to kill him when he's wearing a full legal helmet. In fact, we design it that way. However, some fighters need extra help, and one of the things that helps fighters count their count or get a good load is the clack of rattan against steel. It's a very distinctive sound. When they hear it, they'll call the blow. When they don't, they won't. So we design our thrusting tips to have good catching. We design our swords to have that same clack. Same thing with axes, same thing with maces. When I go through making swords, we'll say that as a principle. There's a lot of things that go into them. I happen to like curved swords, and some of you have seen them and want them, and I can show you how to do it. This is a standard curved sword that I make, more of a Shamashir Yatagan type. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, since we just got over thrusting tips, is the thrusting tip on this is coated in Plasti-Dip. Now underneath this, it's strapping taped down. But then, it takes a couple of days, I dip this into Plasti-Dip several times, maybe 3-4 coats, depending upon how long they take to dry. It usually takes about 24 hours. And I allow the Plasti-Dip to be the tip. Sometimes I use different colors because different people like to see the thrusting tip or have it identified early on. I use that for that reason. I want my opponent to know that I have a thrusting tip, not to surprise them with it. And so I make it a different color, in this case blue. Now, this was dipped 3 times, left to hang, and then I put on the rest of the tape over the end of it. It is not easy to replace once it does crack and come apart, but I find overall it's really worth the value to have on the sword because it tends to catch this semi-sticky rubberized surface actually catches on plate easier than does almost any rounded surface like you'll find on the round thrusting tips that we see all over the place, the easier to make ones. So I prefer this, and I prefer the narrowed tips, making it simultaneously harder and easier. So this has already been pre-bent. You can see that it has a curve to it that follows the entire thing. Right here in the back, you will see that there's a big divot in the rattan where I had this in a bending pipe and had to strip it. You'll also see on the front the stretched out marks along the yellow, which does make it a little bit weaker. However, I find that it's still useful. That's only the 1 hour later, or one outer layer, and then the rest goes pretty easy. Now, one of the things that you do use to make bending easier is heat. Do not be afraid to heat this. Don't try and soak it in water and boil it. I find that you'll get overbending, and then it takes forever to dry. If you want it to be, you can just heat what is inside it. Now this will be before you use oil. You can simply take a Bernzomatic torch like this, and you'll get this all where you want the bend. Eventually, when it's heated like that, it will bend very smoothly. Hold it into that position until it cools down, and that will create your bend very quickly. You can also create counter bends, as I do on my swords. I've got a bend that goes for the blade this way, and then I bend the handle down to create kind of a pistol grip and replace that bend into the front, more like an S-curve. This blade is still hot, so it's going to take several minutes for it to actually cool down, but that's about all you'll need. You'll find when you've got it in the bend, if you do this while it's on the bender, where the release point happens. What's happening inside there is the fibers of the rattan are slipping apart and swelling, and when they get swollen and you let it cool down, they crush up against each other and they don't allow themselves to go back, which allows the bend to stay. It will also allow you to unbend rattan. If you've got a bendy stick of rattan that you want to make straight, you can use a propane torch and a bender, and you will create straight swords as well. Another aspect of making good weapons, in my opinion, is planing. Definitely at the handle for swords, but honestly, I plane my swords as well as my long weapons because I like the feel of how they move better. Yes, it does weaken the weapon. It does take out some of the weight, so what it does is allows me to pull off, through planing, the actual a section of the rounded rattan. More importantly, what it gives me is, when I'm gripping this weapon, I can tell where the head faces, where the blade edge is, without looking at it. I don't just have a round stick in my hand and then wonder whether or not the blade is in the right spot. I have this with a planed edge. The planed edge lets me know just with my hands that it's always in the right position. The same thing goes for the handles of swords. When I've got a sword and I have a handle like so, this smoothed down handle is ergonomic to my hand. Everybody's is going to be different. You may like squared handles, you may like round handles, you may like handles that have curves or finger marks carved into them. I've seen all of these be people's favorite handles. This one is the one I like. It's kind of a slight V toward the front, not too much that it would cut my fingers, but enough that I can get a little bit better grip around those knuckles. That's what I prefer. But I have to have this planed, because if it's just round and the sword slips in my grip, I'm basically flailing around with a stick. Generally, when I make a weapon, one of the things that I like to do is start out with a weapon in hand that I want to recreate. By doing that, I get a better look, I get some ideas, I get everything I need on that. In this case, I had one of these that a friend of mine asked to make, and I said I would make a weapon that would fit this for combat. Now, obviously it can't be exactly the same, but I can come pretty close. So what I did was, using this as a measure, I took a piece of rattan and we carved it out to approximately the same. It's a little bit too long because you got to leave room for the thrusting tip, but it's there. I then took this part to a lathe and I matched this up so that I would have approximately the same handle, the same style. I can get some escutcheon pins and put those in there. I then had the problem of the tri-foil blade that is inset. Now, it still has to be 1.25 inches across, which this is a little over 1.25 inches, even at its thinnest point. So it's legal, you theoretically could even cut with it, even though it's only thrust. And I planed this out with a sander to give me rattan that was shaped. Now, I wouldn't do this normally to rattan because if it's impacting, this weakens the rattan enough that I would be concerned about it. But honestly, with thrust only, it's not going to weaken the rattan, and so I'm not that concerned about it, and I went on. I then found these things at a secondhand store. It was part of a lamp that had been cut. It had two parts on it, one larger, one smaller. I decided that it would be close enough. I couldn't get both small exactly the same like this, not to mention they're not exactly the same. And then rigged this, cut a hole in it so that it would go all the way down. Now maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but the objective is to get this all the way down to be a handle, using whatever means necessary without breaking it. May need to cut it some more. But it's going to sit right in about here, and you can see kind of what it's going to look like when it's there. I don't want to hit it too hard. I want to actually cut some more out of it if I need to. But then I'm going to put it on with shoe goo. The shoe goo will go inside. It's going to fill up these gaps, and it's going to cling to it really well, and it will take impacts pretty reasonably, and therefore it makes it so that I can get this to be the handle. Now at the far end, this particular dagger is for the Brotherhood. So the Brotherhood of the Daggers of Despair have a specific symbol, which is a skull on the end of the knife for themselves. Here we go. This is starting to go. This will end up right here to match this. This will be carved and put on the end. So when you get fittings like this, you can start to see that it won't be too long before this becomes a dagger that will match the one that we're looking for pretty damn well. Especially with a large mitten gauntlet, something that's going to be around it. It's going to have a thrusting tip that I've built out of the harder foam here, and then the entire thing, which will be slightly shorter and made to measure against this, will be exactly what they're looking for. This dagger ought to last years. There's no reason not to put in a day or two worth of effort to get a weapon that's going to stay with you that long. So when you're making weapons, don't let things scare you or say, hey, I don't know how to make that. Just take one and make it. So when you're planing rattan, it is important to determine where you want your blade. On this one it's pretty easy because we obviously want the blade to follow the curve. With that, you've seen that we have a little bit of planing here and here. All of this is the part that shows where one side is going to be. When you're going to use a planer, you want to alternate sides, but I want to show you both planing and hand planing. I prefer the hand planer because it follows the curve of the rattan more. Flanagan likes the very strict edges of the millimeter precise planer, which will give you exactly a fully planed piece of rattan. You can make your choice, but we've got the video for both. Now, when you have this, if you're doing a hand planer, I have to make sure this is exactly on the bottom. So what I'll do is, you're going to roll this up here. You make sure that your sword has the right curve, and I tend to look at it and get this plane matching between here. Then you get one of these, hand planer. These are the classic tools for creating these from, well, all times. And what you do is you just allow your body weight to pull back like this, and you'll notice how easy you can take off rattan. It's very much accepting of this kind of thing. Now be careful, if you dig too far, you'll take too much. But this lightens the rattan. It does weaken it. However, it makes, in my opinion, for a much smoother, plainer blade that I like, and I like the way it feels better. And with that, it makes me want to do this to almost all of my swords. Some people don't. If you want to have it last longer, my suggestion is you don't do this. But I like the defining edge that it gives because I like as close to a regular sword as I can get. Because what I'm doing here is training to fight with actual blades. And when you do that, you want, there we go. Okay, two things in this that I want to show you. A, you can see the planed edge as it sits right now. The sword is thinner. It's basically about 1.25 inches. Normally I would take a little micrometer, but I'm sure this is 1.25 inches. But something to take a look at is this blackness that's in the blade right here. That is a form of damage to the rattan. This is rotten. Not rotten as we think of it. You can still use this, especially because this side is the one that's out. But this shows a weakness that's going to show up later in the rattan. As you get these that go through the entire piece, you will find that this part is weaker. Honestly, if you can, make this side your handle right here, because the handle will be less to go. This is not weakness. This is just something burning that went on with the thing. So if it looks like that, it's a different style of, it's not even a bug hole. It's just from the burning on the rattan. So now we have an edge that is somewhat defined. If we want to define more edge, my suggestion is either rope edge or leather like this. And what you're going to do is layer your leather across the rattan here, all the way down if you want. Sometimes if you want to have more of a beld striking surface, only on the edge. This will protect the rattan from the edge of shields, armor ridges, things like that real well. Plus, it's the added benefit that it gets a weight to it that you didn't have before in case you wanted it. And it gives you a more defined and edge-on hitting surface, so you always know you're hitting dead with the edge, which I believe we should be training to do. Saying when you want to apply this, the best way to do it, as far as I can tell, is with shoe goo. Shoe goo takes the hit swell, keeps the thing in stock, and what I'm going to do is I run a line of shoe goo just down the blade like this. Doesn't have to be too thick, doesn't have to be awesome. We take our piece. You getting this? We line this up like that. Make sure it's dead in the middle, exactly where you want it. And then what I want you to do is take some crappy strapping tape. No use using the good stuff because you're going to cut this off anyway. And glue this on top and bottom. Then you're going to let it sit for 24 hours for the shoe goo to be on there. Now, another thing to do, you can have several more bands if you want. Run your finger along this and just kind of get it to ease up in there. It is important that you don't have it sticking over the top, however, like I do here. So it's always nice just to have an extra one of these that'll go right there and sit. Then you're going to let this sit for 24 hours, and then you're going to do exactly what I'm about to show you in the way of strapping. How you strap swords is very important. A lot of people don't understand why. I will explain as we go, but this will create for you a very heavy-duty sword that will last a long time and deliver good impact throughout its life. Okay. So in the EMP, you also can build this out of rope, including nylon rope, which also gives you a nice kind of rounded edge as opposed to the leather. I personally prefer hemp for some reason. It's like natural materials or some other weird stuff I've got from somewhere else. But honestly, this stuff works great. You can glue the same technique that I did here. You glue this rope all the way down, strap over it, and you will have a very hard, very directed cutting surface that will do the job you need. This stuff, excellent choice. When applying strapping tape, it is not simply the idea of putting it on and saying it's going to protect. You have to apply it with force and with intent. Now, first things first, along the cutting edge of the blade, I will run a single strip that runs like this, all the way up and down. I'm just going to show you the middle part right now, because this is a training video and I'm not building this sword. Let that plane itself down. It'll give you a nice surface to go off of. And then, leaning it at an angle, I want you to apply your first rung here. Oh, too much of an angle. You have to have it so it has about a 1/3 overlap. So, if you'll take a look at this, you can see how this goes 1/2 to 1/3 of the way around, and you're going to create that little doubled up section there. Now that you've got the first one done, we're going to create 30 more or whatever. But the important part is that I hold here, I keep tension here as much as I can, right? And then I use my left hand to rotate and lay down the tape. My thumbs should be no more than an inch or two across from it. You're going to end up with something that looks about like this. And with the catching of all of those hundreds of strips going both directions, you create a very resilient surface to impacts. Sometimes they'll get through, sometimes sharp edges are going to do it, but honestly, this will do you good. I would also, you do the same thing over this. The reason why we use the shoe glue first is so that it doesn't move. If you try and do it without, you'll just pull it in some weird way that goes on like that. But when you have that kind of layering on your sword, it will last longer, be stronger, and more importantly, when the sword starts to break down, which it will, inevitably, it's rattan and it's firing against wood. When it starts to break down, the tightness of the strapping tape, infinitesimally along with the breaking down, keeps the pressure on it and keeps it stronger longer. You wouldn't think you could do that, but I've seen the results of it over and over. I've actually had a sword where I was using it to the point where I went, oh, it's finally mushy. And when I took off the tip, I could literally pour it. I poured the sawdust out of the middle and had a hole that was still fightable with the inside completely just made into powder. That being said, we want to show you how to not get your swords to be powder. Very important. Let's talk about oiling swords and other rattan weapons. It's going to increase the weight, sometimes considerably, but it depends upon a lot upon what type of oil you use. I like a light vegetable oil. You can Crisco, I don't care. It doesn't matter, you're not going to have to eat it. Olive oil is a little heavier. Mineral oil is about the heaviest. You can do this with almost any oil, and what's going to happen, because rattan is very porous. And normally I would do this before I locked in just take like a red cup or something plastic, doesn't matter that much, and then you're going to tear it out like this. Get some tape. We're going to start here. So, tape against the stick, pull this up high enough, and then tape around the cup. They do this to my sword. Nice and tight. Inside, it's going to be about like this. We're going to take some more tape. Tape the inside. And so that the oil doesn't leak out too badly. You'll be surprised, it'll still get through in some places. You'll like to tape it up more rather than not. I usually tape the bottom really hard, nice and And then I take this end, put it in a cup without all this crap on it, by the way. Shouldn't be doing these two things at the same time. I'm just doing it this way to get you the teaching. Normally you would want to not have shaved this rattan already to put this in, and then you shave it afterwards, because right now it's going to leak out this side. But you put this on the floor, you pour oil into the top, fill up the cup, it'll start draining through. Takes about an hour to go through the cup. Once the oil comes down to the bottom, re-pour it, re-pour it, re-pour it. You can just keep using the same oil and keep shoving it through until you think you've got all of the oil through it. Once you've got it, you'll feel the weight difference in the rattan. It does get heavier, however, it does last longer. As it ages, it will get even stronger as the oil kind of dries. And I find that I don't use it because for me, I'd rather be building new swords. But if rattan is very scarce in your area, if it is difficult to come by, if you have all this, get a sword that's going to last a long time and make it happen that way. But the oiling process, pretty simple. Happy to answer questions on it later. Now that we're past all that and we've been able to use our best weapons most excellently, this is not all or the end all of any all weapons in the EMP. Take this knowledge, go forth, try new weapons, try new things. We will get better, we will advance through your experimentation. The laws of the EMP are designed for versatility, and I really want to see something new. Try something good, talk to your Lord. Thanks.